Good evening. Hello. Hope you had a good week. Just give it a moment as people connect. It's been uh, it's been a good time here. It's been a strange week weather-wise, and with that comes some frustrations with all the extra rain. The garden has sort of erupted, and one of the strange things that's happened to this last 3 years really, with the rewilding project that we started at the beginning of the first lockdown, was that uh, there are large areas of the garden which we maintain access through pathways, but the rest of it we try and leave untouched. But that does still mean that this season we need to keep real close attention to our ability to get around some parts of our garden. And last few days has been particularly difficult to really keep everything in check. So constant reminder of life, a constant reminder of the fact that the world continues. I think it was not far off this time of year during the first year of COVID when I found myself sitting in the garden recording some of the music that we put up, some of the worship music that we put up, just for harvest folks to have something to use in their own personal worship if they wanted to, and listening in the background to the sounds of the cowshed next door, and thinking that while all the world was on pause, while everything in human society was being pushed aside while we dealt with the problems of the pandemic, that the world itself continued and the promises of God were faithful in that way. Like the seasons just rolled on. There is an order to things in the world, a natural way of things, a way which we become familiar with, whether it's the changing of the seasons or it's the detail of our own lives. There are some things that are taken for granted, some things which are considered to be beyond question, or simply they are the way things are. I guess you'd call it conventional wisdom or the lessons of experience. And I've had a reason over the last few weeks to think a lot about the way in which that sometimes conditions our thinking. And so tonight we're going to have a look at something. And before I get into it, I really want to talk about something where you need to know that I'm not directing this as a measure of your personal walk with God. There are some people out there, and they would like you to think that there are things which you should be receiving, things that you should be experiencing. And if you're not, that somehow you are a failure, or you are somehow missing out because of something that you've done or something about you. And that is the exact opposite of what I want to do tonight. What I want to do tonight is to encourage you that whoever you are, and no matter what your experience has been up to this point, that there is an opportunity for something radically beyond all that you could ask or think. It's true of my life. It's true of the lives of the people that are part of Harvest. It's true of whoever you might be. People that have experienced extraordinary, miraculous wonders in their lives. Still, today, they have a need for God to move as God promises, not simply within the constraints of the things that they think may or may not be true. So tonight I want to encourage you. And if you're thinking, well, I don't have anything like this in my life, God has no favorites. God has no favorites at all. And if you are staring at circumstances and you feel like they're overwhelming, and you're saying, well, I just have to get through this, I want to tell you that God loves you, that he feels every sorrow, every challenge with you, and that God does not condemn those who run to him for help and for shelter. He doesn't expect us to arrive with some great demonstration and declaration of what extraordinary faith and what our expectations might be, but simply that we trust him. And in some ways, that's where we're going to start tonight. It's with this question of trust. When we talk about salvation, we're talking about something which is supernatural, something which is beyond any human ability to comprehend or achieve. If you think about the center of the Christian message, it is that God himself took human form, lived as one of the least among us, suffered all the indignities of the worst possible human treatment, and endured the death of the cross, that he would forgive us. Not because he needed to, not because there was something in it whereby he was diminished if he didn't, not because it was the only way to deal with the problem of sin. None of those things. He could have dealt with sin. He could have started again. He could have shown us his goodness and his majesty. All of those things he could have accomplished without ever giving us hope or opportunity. Not only that, but he did it without binding our wills to it. And so he suffered the cross, and he endured all the shame and the opposition and the unpleasantness of his time on earth, and he bound himself forever to be one of us, to commit himself unreservedly to anyone who would trust him, just for the possibility that we might know him. It is a radical thing. If you believe in the love and the mercy of God, there is no greater miracle. There is no more outrageous declaration that God would say to whoever, regardless of their past, regardless of their current situation, regardless of any behavior, activity, or character attribute, regardless of identity, regardless of how much they know or how much they don't know, God would say, come back to relationship, come back into family, come and be my child, and I will give you all that I am. That is so outrageous that compared to that, the parting of seas, the raising of the dead, and the moving of mountains is barely anything. And so, if we really do believe that God came in the flesh, died on the cross, offering his sinless life, and declared forgiveness for all of us, and that he was raised again on the third day and is exalted to the right hand of the majesty on high, and that he is still Jesus, Son of Man, as well as Son of God, well, then we ought to have supernatural expectations. But so often, there are things that we take for granted because the world says they're inevitable. Things that we look at and we say, well, it's always been this way. It never was before. And these last few weeks, I've been challenged by the fact there are things that I'm praying for, situations that I'm praying into that relate to people at the start of their lives. But for some reason, I don't also pray them for people who are older. There are things that I'm hoping for those who appear to have a way through, and there are others that I think, well, for whatever reason, and I can't really put my finger on it, I don't present it to God. It's as though I say, well, I guess they've had a reasonable shot, or well, that's not the stage of life they're in, or. And the more I've thought about it, the sadder I've become, and the more convicted that we need to start to encourage one another that God does not have limits based on what we consider to be normal. People who know me know that in my own life I've experienced supernatural healing. That is to say, I've experienced those things where we've prayed and God has moved in such a way that I believe that God is the one responsible for the fact that I have been healed, delivered out of circumstances. God has done it time and time again in my life. And so I could never say that I don't believe that God does miracles, but do I really present to him everything with an expectation of his majesty and power being brought to bear in that situation? Or are there some things that I think, well, we just have to muddle through that? For those who are his friends and his followers during his earthly ministry, they really got to see some things. They got to see the healing of incurable diseases, the restoration of bodies. When Jesus heals lepers, he doesn't just deliver them out of ongoing leprosy, but he restores all that the disease has taken. We see Jesus restoring sight to the blind and raising the dead, and we see these extraordinary demonstrations of his power, and yet in their own lives there was still that expectation that, well, things happen. So tonight, I want us to just have a brief look at part of what happens when Jesus goes to the graveside of Lazarus. In John 11, reading from verse 35, we read this: Jesus wept. And the Jews said, "See how he loved him." And some of them said, "Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, "Lord, by this time there's a stench, for he's been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." And he who had died came out, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Loose him and let him go." You know, Jesus is surrounded in this moment by a crowd who know that he has miraculous power, but they draw a line between what they think he could do and the circumstances in which they find themselves. What the crowd says, couldn't this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying? If he'd got here sooner, he has enough power to deal with the healing of the living, but what about the dead? But they understand that he has miraculous power. And so there's this line between the miracles they think he can do and the miracles they think he can't do. And they find themselves in a situation where they are beyond the threshold of where they think God could intervene. I don't know what situations you're praying about right now. I don't know what situations you're facing, and you just think, well, this is how time passes. This is what happens in life. This is what everybody goes through. Tonight, I want to encourage you and say, there is no line. With God, all things are possible. God is able. It doesn't matter what the situation is. And it might be that in your experience, you have witnessed him intervening in other ways. I think for those of us who've been on this journey of faith for a long time, there are always things that to us, they just seem obvious, that God will do it. That God is provider is one I can think of, that for both myself and my immediate family, but also for the Harvest community, we know that time and again God has provided in extraordinary, just unexpected, unpredictable, undescribable ways. Things that we can't even articulate to other people because it just sounds so absolutely outrageous. But we have that confidence God will provide. In my own life, there are times when I have trusted God for healing simply because I just knew that he would. But for me, there are things where when I think about them, I don't first think about, well, I should take that to God and get him to intervene. My first thought quite often is, well, isn't that a terrible thing to be happening? Or, oh, isn't that an insurmountable need? And I shouldn't. Because with God, all things are possible. And so Martha responds to Jesus' request that they take away the stone from the tomb of Lazarus with the conventional wisdom. Look, Lord, by this time there's a stink because he's been dead 4 days. It's too late. It's too late. This is just the way it is now. I appreciate your comfort. I appreciate your presence. I'm moved by the fact that you have wept with us. I heard your declaration about being the resurrection and the life, and so I'm sure that he'll be raised in the last day. But Lord, don't disturb the grave. And yet, if we believe that God forgives anybody, if we believe that God loves without exception, if we believe that God's mercy extends to everybody, then that is a far, far greater thing, far more miraculous than any raising of the dead, than any breaking of the conventional wisdom, than anything that says, no, it simply doesn't have to be this way. Verse 40, Jesus says to her, did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? You know, that word believe, it's pisteuo, it's trust, it's faith, it's this idea of placing your confidence in one, and so committing yourself to their care, to their trust, committing yourself to act on, live in the consequences, and in the fullest expression of the truth that you believe to be true. It's trusting someone with yourself. Jesus saying, trust me, Martha. Because my promise was not if you figure it out, not if you can talk it up, not if you can act as though you're not really grieving and it's probably okay, not if you can come up with some super spiritualization of something. No, no. If you just trust me, you're going to get to see the glory of God. The word we translate as glory is doxa. It speaks of majesty and power. It speaks of the authority and the character of one who is appointed. It's not just what he can do, it's who he is. It's not just his dominion and his power and his exalted position, but it is the responsibility and the way that he exercises it. Doxa encapsulates the whole of the character and the works of God. If you trust, says Jesus, you're going to see the glory of God. You know, sometimes our response to conventional wisdom is, yeah, I suppose so. Tonight, I want to encourage you to trust beyond conventional wisdom. To trust beyond your circumstances, to not say, well, I'm too small, so I can't. Or I'm too old, so I can't start that now. Or I'm too young, so nobody will listen to me. To not say, well, everybody else has tried it and nobody could change it. Because if you trust him, you're not going on your own. You're not acting on your own. And the promise of God is if you trust him, he will show his glory in your circumstances, in your situation, in the things that you're facing, because he has no favorites. And so if Martha doesn't get special treatment, all of his people have access to this same extraordinary power. And so Martha doesn't stop them from taking the stone away. And they roll the stone back. Jesus prays and he declares, look, I'm praying so that you folk around me will understand that I am sent by the Father. And because I'm sent, I have authority. He shouts to the dead man, Lazarus, come forth. You know, so often when I pray, I find myself rehearsing the problem to God. He's patient, and I don't think I'm condemned for that. I go over and over it in my head, and I present it to him, and I tell him all the detail I can think of. The reality, though, is this. God knows. He knows. He absolutely knows. And so when I trust him, when I come to him in trust and I present him with the situation, I say, God, I just got to trust you. I need you. to act. I need you to move. I need you to change circumstances. I need you to heal bodies. I need you to break chains. I need you to rescue, to deliver, to guide, to provide whatever it is that I need. When I trust him, sometimes I'm trusting him for folk who are in a situation where they cannot trust. They've not yet encountered him. They don't know. Maybe I can't even get to them. I can't even communicate it to them. Maybe they're that shut down, or they're beyond my access, but I'm not relying on what they know. I'm not even relying on whether or not they trust. Lazarus was dead. Jesus doesn't say to Martha, didn't I tell you that if Lazarus trusted, you were going to see the glory of God? And oh, good news, by the way, he did, just in time. Oh, she trusts. And when Jesus shouts to the dead man, come forth, you know, there are things sometimes, and they seem beyond all recovery, things that you think, I can't get that back. I can't retrieve that. I can't undo it. I can't get back to where it should be. I can't make that right. Tonight I want to tell you that if you trust him, God will speak into that situation. There may be things that are dead, and he'll speak life to them. And it may be that there are people that are beyond your reach, and he can speak right into their situation and bring them out of the things that are hurting, harming, hindering them. He can speak provision to people whose hands are closed and whose eyes are not even open. God can meet every need. And he hears you and he sees you. He says, trust me and you'll see my glory. Your trust can bring the power and the presence of God into the need of the people that you love. Even if they're not seeking, you can. Even if they're not praying, you can. Even if they're not trusting, you can. Lazarus adds nothing to this until he hears that voice of God. And when he hears the voice of God, the dead man comes out. You might be thinking, well, why is Dylan talking about this stuff? Why is he bringing it up? Why is he talking about impossibilities? Why is he doing that? Surely it would be better just to talk about spiritual things that don't have that obvious practical edge to them. That would be being dishonest and dishonorable. After all the times that God has been my healer and my provider and my deliverer and my wisdom and my peace, I would be just failing you completely if I did not say that I believe in a supernatural God with all authority, dominion, and power. I believe that he still shows his glory today. I believe that he still hears and answers prayer. And I believe that people who trust him get to see what happens when the majesty on high brings all of his power and wisdom and mercy to bear in their lives and accomplishes those things which defy conventional wisdom. Tonight you might be thinking about situations and circumstances, about needs and diagnoses, things where the conventional wisdom is, well, it's over now. Well, this will just take its course. It's just going to go the way that everybody else says it does. This is just how it is. We just live with this. Tonight I want to tell you that I believe in a God for whom there is no final diagnosis, with whom there is no constraint or limitation. He says, trust me, and you too can see the glory of God. To folk that have never trusted Jesus before, it begins when you trust him to receive you, to accept you, to love you, to forgive you, to give you his extraordinary transforming life, and you trust him enough that the transformation will not be harmful. It won't hurt you. It will be just glorious and for your good. I can't tell you what he'll do. I can't tell you what in your life will be made new and how it will be made new, because I know that all things are made new. And that doesn't mean that you don't still love some of the things that you love or do some of the things that you do. It doesn't mean that you have no connection In practical terms, what it means is that you are an entirely new creature living by the power of God in the life in which you find yourself. When you first trust Him, you trust Him that He's good to those who seek Him and those who find Him, that He loves to bless them. But as you go on down the road, you learn to trust Him more and more and more. You learn to trust Him for every provision. You learn to trust Him for every decision. You learn to trust Him to be present even when there's nobody else around, to hear what you're thinking, to know the desires and the hurts of your heart, to provide for you in every conceivable way. Tonight, I want to encourage you, if you've never made that choice, you should do it. Because there is a God who loves you and you cannot imagine what life with Him is like. And I have no words for it. But if you've been on the road for a long time, sometimes there are journeys and pathways that we follow in life, circumstances that wash against us so many times, we become numbed to them and we just assume, well, this is my lot. This is how it's going to be. The man Jesus heals who's waiting by the water at the pool to be healed, if he could just get in the water fast enough. He's been there for decades. The man by the gate that Peter and John meet on their way to the prayer meeting, who asked them for some sort of charitable donation, and instead they command that he gets up and walk in the name of Jesus. He's been there all his life. We don't know how long blind Bartimaeus was blind. We don't know how long the son of the widow at Nain had been dead, but what we do know is this, that Jesus is healer and deliverer. And the same God that raised the dead then, the same God that healed bodies then, the same God that provided all that was necessary for people's lives then, the same God that welcomed and loved and healed and forgave is not diminished now. The God that parted the ocean for His people Israel, the God that gave victory and deliverance to people who were oppressed and people who were just incapable of remedying their own situation, is the same God today. The God who is my healer. The God who has been my provider all these years. He's got no favorites. And tonight I want to tell you, encourage you, that the things that you have become familiar with, that hurt, that break, that hinder, if you'll trust Him, our God is more than able and willing to resolve every one of those situations and to show you what His glory, His majesty, and character really can do for you and for the people that you love. That's our thoughts for this evening. Lord bless you. As ever, if you want to get in touch, you can get the details below these videos. We'd be delighted to get in touch with you, just to pray with you or pray for you, to rejoice in the goodness of God in your life, the things that God is doing for you. God willing, we'll see you again next Sunday night.